Okay, thank you. We have a little shift in the list of the presentation. We start the next talk with a technological intervention, where we can observe and see how the technologies can support learning in educational research. I invited the next speaker, Panagiotis Bamidis, for introduce his talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. I apologize in advance for shifting this, having to shift the presentation. It was supposed to be the last one, but my flight was cancelled in the afternoon, so you can blame it to Alitalia. Anyhow, I'm going to talk about technologies that can be used to enhance learning, and since I'm coming from a medical school, I will emphasize in medical education. The link with the project, the one project, that you are going to hear very interesting presentations later on, is twofold. The first connection is with technologies, how different technologies can be utilized to connect people together, to connect the learners and educators together. And we will have the opportunity to see examples of this through a project that I'm going to present you. And the second one is basically to see how we can educate our doctors better, so that then they can follow the different developments in monitoring diseases and monitoring situations, difficult situations like the one that is involved in ADHD. So, let me give you a few facts and challenges that we face in medical education. The first one is that the knowledge is expanding. We have a great production of medical and biomedical information, especially in the last few years, and the medical disciplines become increasingly over-specialized. Many doctors, for example, don't know exactly what ADHD is and how it can be treated or can be faced. Medical education is very specific because it includes both the theoretical instruction but also clinical skills, clinical apprenticeship. So we have to make sure that we provide the theoretical background to our doctors, but also give them the opportunity to practice in certain clinical situations. And therefore, medical education is based on a broad range of learning contents, which nowadays become more and more digital. And for materials to become useful, they need to be exchanged between people. Of course, most of us remember how we used to work in the previous decades when there was no internet. But today, most of us, of course, work through the internet technologies. How do we share materials? How do we share educational approaches? Usually, we look for material through search engines like Google, etc. But the searches that we get are a little bit, so to say, they don't assist us very much. They give us a lot of outputs, but we don't know which ones to choose, etc. And we have minimal sharing mechanisms. We don't have the means to, if we find something very useful in one educational technology environment, then how can we shift this to the e-learning system that we might be using? And how do we get technologies that allow us to collaborate and produce materials together? In other words, enhance the peer-to-peer collaboration. And we need a different approach that can have a good look at how the educational and learning data can be better structured and therefore better harvested, and can allow users to search in different systems together across repositories, e-learning repositories, and this is basically a technological call to engage into the usefulness of technologies that appeared lately, like the semantic web, the social collaboration or Web 2.0, and what it was called the social dynamics a few years ago. So one of the projects that we had, and just finished a few months ago, was called Meducator, and the idea was to have the abilities, the technical backgrounds, so that people can discover, retrieve, use, rate, and reuse, or otherwise repurpose educational material. And I'll come to the definitions of repurposing and the materials in a moment, irrespectively of which learning management system or which educational repository they're using. And we had two target groups. The first was generally academics, health professionals, and students and learners. And the second one was the technical providers of educational solutions, or especially in the healthcare domain and the educational technology domain. And we managed to produce basically two systems, two frameworks basically. The idea was to have the different educational institutions which have data, have educational repositories, one institution, a second institution, etc. We try to connect these together. And therefore, if we have a user in one institution searching for material, they can also search the different institutions all together so that they can utilize the materials of their colleagues from other institutions and enhance better the material that they are producing for their own purposes. And we have provided two frameworks basically. We call these frameworks Meducator 2.0 and Meducator 3.0 from the technologies that we have used behind them. So in the first case we have used what is called Web 2.0 technologies, technologies that are based on mashups. And the second one is using the semantic web, or what we call Web 3.0, and is using semantic linked services basically to engage the systems in a collaboration mode. And we have other sort of things that we have produced. Some of these technologies are going to be utilized perhaps in this project as well. I'll refer to later on in games that are used, for example, and specifically in medical education. Games that for the first time are semantic medical games which capitalize on databases and the encyclopedias of the web, like the Wikipedia and its sort of corresponding semantic description, which is called DBpedia. And we have obtained also a framework to repurpose games. If you have a game that people can play and educate themselves, then one can take, an educator can take this game, repurpose it and change the scenario. And for that purpose we need also an editor of the scenarios to describe the game. We have also evaluated these through a number of different evaluations with technical evaluations or scenario-based evaluations, and user evaluations or institution evaluations, and we have reached different conclusions and recommendations. So let me go back to what kinds of items we use in an educational setting like medical education. A content item refers to any type of educational material which has got a registered history of creation and evolution, and I will come to this in a minute. Usually it is linked with specific educational goals and objectives, learning outcomes, what people will know after they attend this, and different educational contexts or settings to which people this educational material refers to. Undergraduate, postgraduate, schoolboys, whatever. And usually comes recommended with specific teaching methods and strategies or assessment material. Now all these data that we refer to here, all these things, we call them in technology, in the educational technology, metadata. Data that describe the data that describe the content, for example. And in medical education we have different learning types, conventional material like the lectures, like the one I'm producing now, or other types which are unique in medical education. And for example, they are sort of virtual patients, scenario that the doctors go through and try to educate themselves by solving these problems, solving these scenarios. And we also have other techniques that are using the Web 2.0, like wikis and forums and interactive atlases that I'll show you in a moment, and usually content that is generated by users, and all the learning aspects are reflected in these interactions of the users with the system or with the different learning outcomes together. I'll skip this to save some time and come to what repurposing is. So repurposing, we mean in educational technology the act of transforming a learning resource, learning content, which was created initially for a specific educational purpose, and change it into a specific other purpose in the same or different educational context. And by different repurposing, we mean if you try to repurpose something from one language to another, or from one culture to another, or from one pedagogical approach to another, or between different educational levels. So, for example, if I have a material that refers to the Mediterranean culture, and I want to make it for the North European countries, that's a repurposing aspect of the material. I'll change my material to fit those purposes. And this is very crucial now, because this is what we always do. When we create educational material, we are trying to find something that others have produced and make it fit our own goals. As teachers, you might have realized this many, many times. What are the contemporary materials that we are using in medical education, for example? Things like the discussion forums. You set up a discussion, and students interact in there to give you replies to the questions that you have posed. And now this is also some educational material on its own. This material, the replies, are generated by users, and therefore is also educational material. And we have also blogs that are doing the same thing. People are using the web to note down experiences, to note down the actions that they have in order to reply to your question. And we have used these as a paradigm to shift lectures from the usual audience-based style to a style that is going to be problem-based. We set up a problem in one of the blogs or in one of the wikis, and we ask the students, the medical students in our case, to interact with the wiki and the forum and the blog and resolve the situation stepwise, little by little. Some other interactive educational material that is very different from what you might have seen is this interactive material, which is called Interactive Atlas. You have set, for example, a picture in which you ask your students then to, like a quiz, to reply and show you where the shoulder is, show you, this is an anatomy course, show you where the different aspects of anatomy are. And rather than just replying to multiple choice questions, people can draw things here, and then the teacher can come and correct these. And he can put ticks when the answers are correct, or X's when the answers are not correct. And all this interaction is saved into a learning environment, and then it is offered as new educational material with all the interactions to the people. So you can see where people are doing wrong, and you can see what's the most common mistake, for example. Other things that we are using is portals, web portals, which have got cases, medical cases. So one of the things that we have utilized, for example, is this portal called MedThink, one of our partners in Spain. And medical doctors and medical educators can go there, put in their pictures, their films, whatever, and they can pose a specific problem with some diagnosis. The next people to visit this portal can upload their own diagnosis, their own differential diagnosis, and their own comments on the system. So the cases are built up, the clinical cases are built up interactively in this case. Another paradigm of a unique content item in medical education that we have is this screenshot, which shows an interactive virtual patient. So we set up a specific scenario over the web, and then our students or our health professionals are visiting this specific web page, and they try to reply to questions. Depending on the questions, on the answers that they provide at the bottom, then the scenario is changing, and they are asking, it is asking new questions to them, it is giving them new medical data to examine their case. All they have to do is get the patient and therefore the result, treated, and therefore the case resolved. If the patient dies, then they also fail the, basically the exam, if this was an exam, or the tutorial, if it was a tutorial. Another action that I already mentioned is serious games. This is an example of where rather than giving a lecture to the students of how the climate might affect our health, this is an example of they play with some specific parameters of the climate change, and they see the epidemics growing. And therefore, by playing this game, you teach the students, for example, how to be careful with their own sort of climate issues and climate sensitivities, and be more careful. In another example of a serious game, we can use virtual reality and avatars like these. For example, this is a place where an accident was held, and there are injured people on the pavement, and the game is for ambulance staff. We ask them to go into the place where this accident happened and get all the injured patients assessed, if they need to be transferred to the hospital with the first ambulance, with the second ambulance, etc. So depending on the assessment of the case, we will know if they have learned their material properly or not. So to go back to the technologies, we have utilized these two technologies, the Meducator 2.0 and Meducator 3.0, that are trying to make the people from different institutions share such material, which is difficult to describe. For example, one of the things that you can try is to search in Google and find a serious game, for example. But it will not lead you to a specific serious game that you need for your own purpose. It will lead you to words of serious games or whatever, and therefore it will not make you find what you're looking for. And through these environments that we have used, we have made this happen. We ask the people to describe the contents in a specific way, and therefore it is easy to find content. Another framework that I mentioned was Meducator 3.0, and is using this notion of linked data that are sort of describing the content, but they are also published themselves in the web. Specifically, there is this data cloud, which is called linked data cloud, and the descriptions of those data are stored in different categories over that web. This is one of the last 3 years developments in this field, which are going to shape better our knowledge. Anyhow, in this framework, which we called Meducator 3.0, again we have different databases, different learning management systems that hold different learning resources. And through this technology, the linked data technology, we are trying to make these systems talk to each other, basically. And we have different systems that can do that, quite different technologies. One that I'm going to show you, which is called Melina Plus. It is, for those that know, it's based on the Drupal system. Another one which we called Miles Plus, and it's an extension of the Moodle learning environment. And another one which is called Linked Labyrinth Plus, which calls an extension of the Open Labyrinth tool that holds these virtual patients that I mentioned. And we have managed to get these systems connected all together and talking to each other. Let me give you an example of what this thing called Melina is, which is freely available, and we might also use it for the purposes of this project. Its name is taken from Medical Education Linked Arena, and is using these Meducator 3.0 technologies. It's an open source system based on the Drupal, as I mentioned. And these are some screenshots. You can visit that. You can register yourself as a user, and then you can explore the database and or create new descriptions of data. And these are different screenshots. So all I want to emphasize is that we can have also collaboration aspects between the different users. Users can be friends and can be sort of colleagues, etc. One of the capacities of the system is that it's using these linked data technologies, and therefore if you have uploaded a material which is virtual patients, then semi-automatically the system is looking for other relevant material over the web. Specifically, they look for anything that is relevant to your presentation in Wikipedia, for example, and brings into the system companion material that associates your material with that material. And this is one of the nice features because it just does the job for you. And as I said, we can bring into the system collaboration aspects like the relationships. If I upload something, then my followers can see what I have uploaded and can see what I have changed. And I can also give them different rights to do, view only my material, delete my material, or update my material. And there is also, we have also set up a quality process control, especially if we are doing this job with medical students in our case, where people can publish on the first stage, but this is then the material is reviewed, and then once it's accepted, it's published properly on the website and the portal. And we have also allowed for single sign-on, so that people can have just one password to go around and one username, and they don't confuse the usernames and passwords. This is free to use. You can use it from this address, and you can also download it by through this portal, and you can install it if you have a Drupal environment as an installation profile in your institution, and make it talking to the rest of the linked institutions altogether. So we have managed to innovate this thing and try to change the, basically impact the community and change the way we think in medical education. We have tried to impact different communities, be them technical communities or medical communities. And as I mentioned, we have taken extensive evaluations with experts, academics or students, as well as technical providers and institutions of these technologies. And we have also tried to practice them specifically in workshops, like one of the spring schools that we have organized last April, and we are going to organize it again this coming September. The first one was held in Thessaloniki in Greece, but the second one is going to be held in Nice in France. And in there we have asked the material, the people to play with the material interactively, and together in a conference that we have organized also. And the portal that we have used was linked was used for this purpose. For example, through the presentation of the material in the school or in the conference, people could see the abstract, but they can also see then this little thing there, that if you hit it, then it logs you into the platform, and you can describe this material as an educational material. So if you find something which is useful, you use this teaser to place it in your own platform for describing educational resources, and therefore have it available for your own students. And for those that might be interested, we have a special issue which is upcoming in the Journal of Medical Internet Research, and we also organize specific workshops and tracks. One of the following ones is held in Porto in June. It's called Computer-Based Systems, and specifically the track on medical education enhanced by technology and computer-driven simulations. We are doing this with some colleagues in Norway and New York. Some further work that we have done is to try to do some parts of this work in the virtual environment. Here you see some screenshots of the work that we have been doing in Second Life, which is a virtual environment in which people take the form of avatars and they walk into the educational environments, institutions. And some of these environments that I have mentioned, we are trying to experiment and see how people can visualize the resources and capitalize on these technologies that I mentioned. Also, one of the things that we have recently got in place is what I mentioned, semantic medical games. This is the first game of its kind. It's called Doctor Who. the game begins and asks a central concept. For example, you have a drug and you are trying to guess what this drug is. It gives you some symptoms that people can have, or it gives you what happens, how expensive it is, or whatever. And you are trying to save money, basically, in the game in order to find out the concepts related to this drug. And this is all the questions that are asked in this are automatically taken from Wikipedia, basically. And it's one of the nice ways of making games for education, and these games can now explore and exploit all the richness of data that are available on the web in a dynamic and automatic way. This is how this tool looks like. At this thing is how much money you are left of. You are starting with 5,000 euros, for example, and then you are trying to solve the problem and win before you run out of money or time. That's all. I hope it wasn't tired enough. If you want to hear more things, you can visit the Meducator Project YouTube channel and see different videos there, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Meducator and at Meducator, the Facebook and Twitter options for these, or my personal one, which is this one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Panagiotis. And there is questions? Sì. Okay. Can you show the link of the Meducator? Sites. Okay? Yes. Yes, we have seen how the different educational technology can support the educational and the medical process. So I have a question for you. And what are the effects of use this technology in the educational process of students in terms of results, for example?
We have used these in our undergraduate courses and at the moment, and some of the parts of these systems in postgraduate courses, like with doctors that are following MSc courses. And we have specific scenarios in which we say, okay, if you look for specific material, are these tools going to be any useful? Are they easy to use? Do you benefit educationally? And the first results that we have obtained from something like 200-300 users are very positive. And what is also positive is the way that the material that you find in there is not, usual material. It's not like a PowerPoint or something. It's more unique. Like you find the virtual patient scenario, or you find the game, and this excites them.
Okay. There are questions? Other questions? Yes.
Faccio la domanda in italiano, magari così i colleghi hanno provato a sviluppare ambienti di apprendimento sincroni, cioè non sviluppati su repository, su tutta una serie di cose che il professore ha detto, ma che in modo sincrono mette in contatto i medici, sia da un punto di vista di apprendimento e di scambio di esperienze, sia soprattutto, per esempio, per gli studenti, pensavo, seguire in diretta delle attività del medico, per esempio delle operazioni particolari, delle situazioni particolari. Grazie.
Okay. Do you have used some synchronous technologies inside of this system for create some type of exchanges between students and other actors of the educational processes?
Yes, one of these environments that I mentioned is called, for example, Miles Plus. In there we also have teleconferencing systems adopted. So you can have a live show, like with the camera or the voice. And on the side you can have questions that are posed by students. So it's easy to sort of either write questions or stop you and ask questions. So these tools give you this capacity. on top of that, but we haven't sort of utilized this properly in our case. So we have mostly experimented and evaluated offline technologies, but the availability of these tools are there.
Okay.